Hello there, and welcome back to Hydroponics Daily, your go-to podcast for everything soilless cultivation. I'm your host, Dr. Russell Sharp, the founder of Eutrema Ltd. But before I founded Eutrema, I was an academic plant scientist. And one of the things I did while I was a plant scientist at universities was I reintroduced a couple of extinct varieties that weren't being grown anymore of tomatoes. And one was called the Blaby Special. And the Blaby Special was a variety that was grown on the east of Leicester. And it was in an area that we used to be growing all the tomatoes for London. But then since the tomatoes were grown in Spain from the 1970s onwards, this variety became extinct in the UK. And so I reintroduced it from a seed bank in Holland. And I did the same with the Manx Marvel, which was a variety that came from the Isle of Man, which is in the middle of the Irish Sea, if you're not sure of where the Isle of Man is. Now, I wanted to talk today about the relative importance of preserving rare varieties of plants and rare strains and cultivars of plants versus conserving rare species of plants. Now, people often talk about how important it is to preserve these rare varieties because they might have features in that are useful and, phenotypes and genotypes that are useful for breeding purposes. And yes, this is true. They can do, and they can have, unique features about pest and disease control. So it is important to preserve them. But you also have to balance that with the fact that just a few modifications in, say, a tomato's genes, a few mutations can produce wildly different looking plants. And what might seem on the surface to be massive genetic variation is not really. It's just a mutation here or two. So it's not that massive. You're not retaining a massive amount of genetic diversity by doing that. Same with apples. There's a few mutations or crossbreedings and you get wildly different looking apples. But really, the genetics is very, very similar. When we talk about, preserving the genetics, we're talking about the wild strains and things like this. If you could get a wild strain of a wheat ancestor, then you can get the genes from that and crossbreed it with wheat. And the same for potatoes and tomatoes. You're looking at the wild species more than the varieties, really. And moving on to species, when you talk about retaining a rare species, this is far, far more important. This is a whole species. It's the difference between, making sure that we retain people with really big, long noses compared to retaining a whole species of humans. It's off the scale different, isn't it? It would be a shame if everyone with long noses went extinct tomorrow and died off, but that's completely different to the whole of humanity disappearing. And that's the same with, say, a rare orchid and preserving a rare orchid than it is preserving a few different tomato varieties or a few legal cannabis strains and things like this. So, yes, it's important to retain genetic diversity, but really you don't know what is genetic diversity until you actually do a genetic study and see how different the genes are. Look at like DNA profiling and things like this. Look at the genetic difference. It's not an area I'm a particular expert on, but certainly know that, we can over-exaggerate the importance of retaining rare strains and varieties, heritage varieties sometimes. And a lot of the times that the ones that have gone very, very rare are susceptible to pests and diseases. So if you think about like Acer Craig used to be a really popular tomato variety, and now it's not grown really anywhere apart from plant scientists who use it because they've always used it. But just commercial growers don't use it because it's not resistant to lots of pest diseases and viruses. But it was probably used as the starting block for the breeding of new varieties. So there will be Acer Craig genetics in there. It's just that it's not called Acer Craig anymore. So if I was you, and when you think about things that we should be conserving, then always consider like preserving species and whole plant genera that are going extinct in the wild. The destruction of the rainforest and things like this. This is far more of an issue than it is preserving a few tomato or apple varieties. I'd love to know your thoughts because it's fairly controversial, that opinion. And you think I've missed anything, got anything wrong, then please do let me know. If you found this episode useful, then please do leave an Apple Podcast review if you can do, because it helps out the podcast tremendously because it shoots us up the podcast charts. If you're listening on any other podcast platforms, chill out and relax and just wait for the next episode, because it doesn't make any difference if you leave a review on them or not. If you're on those other platforms, perhaps you could check out Eutrema.co.uk and see what we're able to offer in hydroponics and in other areas. Yeah, we do lots of things in sports turf and lawn care and things like this, and in agriculture, large-scale field-grown crops as well as soilless crops. Thank you very much for listening. Until tomorrow, goodbye.